Hello and welcome to The Long Run, Navigating the Miles of Modern Leadership. I'm Martin Lewis, I'm your host, and I'm going to take you on a paradigm-shifting journey of a lifetime. Life is in permanent flux. Let me begin with a moment that may feel uncomfortable. It's Monday morning. The strategy has shifted again, the technology map has evolved again, and there's a new AI capability everyone is talking about again. Your people are watching you, not because they expect certainty, but because in the world that keeps moving, they're looking for something steady. Leadership today is no longer about guiding organisations throughout periods of change. It's about leading in a state of permanent transition. That creates a profound tension because while technology accelerates, humans have not evolved at the same pace. So the question we're exploring today is this: how do leaders create predictability, identity and purpose in a world that refuses to stand still? And perhaps counterintuitively, could AI actually help us do that? I want to spend a few minutes thinking about why humans struggle with constant change. Before we talk about leadership or AI, we need to talk about people. Because underneath every transformational program, every restructure, every digital initiative, there is a human nervous system trying to cope with that. So first of all, let's start with this idea of predictability. It's really important for humanity to have predictable circumstances. From a neurological perspective, uncertainty is processed as a threat. When people don't know what to expect, the brain shifts into protection mode. This is why research into psychological safety matters so much. When people feel unsafe, when the ground feels unstable, they don't do their best thinking. They do their safest thinking. They avoid risk, they narrow their focus, they comply rather than contribute. So when change is constant and unpredictable, what leaders often interpret as resistance is actually self-protection. Let's move on to identity. Decades of research into social and role identities show that people derive a sense of self from what they do, what they belong to, and how they contribute. Rapid change disrupts all three of those things. So imagine you're on the Millennium Falcon in Star Wars now and you can see all of those lines passing by the windows, and that is essentially what's happening to your role. You're travelling in hyperspace and your role is blurring. Your skills become obsolete and your status also becomes rather uncertain. And quietly, beneath the surface, people begin asking, who am I here now? And what is my value if everything just keeps shifting? So I want to pose that people don't resist change because they dislike progress per se. They resist change because it can feel like identity loss. Now finally, let's look at purpose. Human beings are, remarkably tolerant of difficulty when it means that it's leading towards something meaningful. If that meaning isn't there, what we often find is that we struggle because there's a lack of explanation. So what we end up is finding ourselves in a process where we are moving forward without any recognition of what it is and why we're moving forward. So this is motion without meaning. When change feels arbitrary, when those decisions aren't explained, when work no longer connects to impact, exhaustion starts to set in. So people don't burn out because they're working hard. They are burning out because the work that they're doing stops making sense to them. They can't actually create any level of connection to that. Okay, and this is where we find ourselves in what I would call the leadership paradox. This is the biggest leadership paradox of our time. So on one side, let's just paint the scene. We've got rapidly changing technology. We've got new systems, we've got AI, and we've got software that's developing, super rapidly. We've got an inordinate amount of data, endless data, more data than we can ever process or know what to do with. We've got increasing complexity around that data, so the interplay between those systems is much more complex. And we've got pressure to move faster because of all of these things are moving at such a rate. And on the other hand, we've got humans who aren't evolving at the same rate. We need a predictable sense of what's going to happen. We need a stable sense of identity, and we need a reason to care about all of those things that are happening, such as rapid technological change, a huge amount of data, increasing complexity, and a pressure to mean that we need to move faster. So organizations are now moving at the speed of software, at the speed of a well-oiled machine, at the speed of computer technology, which people just do not move at the same speed as that. And the traditional models or the traditional leadership response is often to push much harder. So let's have more of everything. Let's go big, more communication. Let's have more urgency. Let's have more vision statements about what our goals are. And actually we're trying to get to these KPIs via this mode and all of that nonsense, which is, is important, but it, within that leadership paradigm, to the human being, it's got to be translated into something that's much more meaningful. And this creates noise, not clarity. And humans desire clarity. People are not asking leaders to predict the future necessarily, but they are asking their leaders to create steadiness in a present state. So this leads us to think about, okay, well, what can we use to create stability? And this is where I think we probably need to rethink our vision around AI. So AI is certainly, certainly, not uncertainly, it's leading to uncertainty, but I think it's certainly an accelerator. It's something that can, sort of automate, and it can take away some of the tasks to create creativity. But the problem is that if you just do that and ignore the human, then what you do is you actually kind of erode on that creativity. So let's have this accelerator, yes, but let's also use it as a stabiliser. So this is where we need to really rethink that role of AI. Okay, so most conversations about AI are around fast decisions, greater efficiency, let's have more output, let's redesign our time and put it in the same bucket. But as I said, we can only do that if we really think about what the human understands around that. So this leads us to the question about, what if AI's greatest value isn't in its speed? What if its real potential lies in absorbing complexity so humans don't have to? So let's first of all put it into the framework of our predictability, our identity, and our meaning. So let's think about predictability for a second. So AI is exceptionally good at consistency. It can synthesize vast amounts of information. It can reduce volatility in our decision making. It can apply rules fairly where humans can't, and it can do that consistently and repeatedly. Used well, this reduces leadership whiplash, so fewer unexplained reversals, clearer rationale, more time to support individuals where that need is evident. So change still happens, but it feels slightly less random now. It feels like it is, okay, well, this change is predictable. It's following a path that we expect. That's powerful. Let's now think about identity. So AI can also support in that domain if it is designed thoughtfully, not sort of randomly thrown out, but actually, okay, let's do this, but let's do it in a way to support someone's identity. So it could be done, it can surface strengths, patterns of contribution, think about new learning pathways. It can certainly help people to see how their value evolves rather than disappears. So the message becomes, you still matter here, even as the work is evolving and changing. Let's now move on to purpose. Yeah, that's quite tricky. AI cannot create meaning, but what it can do is it can help connect the dots for people. So it can analyse. It can show how individuals' effort links to outcomes. It can highlight progress leaders might otherwise miss. It can support a coherent story about why change is happening. So AI doesn't generate a purpose, but it can remove the chaos around it that certainly erodes it. But I think it's probably wise at this stage that we don't wholeheartedly go into using AI as a way of managing the human element behind this. I think what would be useful is to think about the ethics. Okay, this is always the question about just because we can doesn't mean that we should. So I raised the ethical question about where stability is won or lost with AI. This is the point where we just need to slow down a little bit, because everything we've just described only works if AI is used for the right purposes. Is it for benefit? Is it going to cause any harm? Does it create a sense of justice around the situation? Does it promote identity, autonomy of the individual, which is important for ethical understanding? And, the ethics here isn't an abstract principle, because it's the difference between having something that's stable and having something that's harmful. So when AI is used poorly, I think predictability could turn into surveillance. I think identity just becomes a data profile, and purpose becomes like an automated performance. People stop feeling supported and start feeling watched. And they stop feeling valued and start feeling measured. And at that point, that's when trust disappears. So ethical AI in leadership rests on a few non-negotiables. Number one, it has to be transparent. People need to know when AI is being used and how it informs decisions and where its limits are. We need human accountability. AI can inform judgment, but it must never replace responsibility. Leaders must still own their decisions, have that accountability, have their trade-offs, and also own consequences. Dignity first. People are not data points. And any system that we introduce that reduces humans to outputs undermines identity and meaning. And then we also need to have boundaries. Just because something can be automated doesn't mean that it should be. The moment leaders hide behind algorithms, that's when leadership ultimately collapses. So this is when we move into our paradigm shift. And this is what this podcast is all about. So what we are doing is moving from control to coherence. So this isn't highlighting a skills gap. It is the paradigm shift itself. So whereas the old leadership model was built on having an information advantage or having decision authority or having control through certainty, Intelligence is no longer scarce. We've got loads of data, we've got loads of knowledge. It's all really, really instantly available. So AI has democratized that. So a leadership shift has to happen. So we move from control to coherence. We move from having answers to creating understanding behind those answers. And we move from driving change to anchoring meaning. So AI can hold complexity, patterns and probabilities. So therefore, on the flip of that, leaders must hold values, context and consequences. So let's have AI as the brain. You manage the intelligence, the information, the data, all that sort of stuff. And humans, we are going to steward the meaning behind that. Yeah, that is something that humans have, since the advent of civilization, have been able to steward meaning. What does this mean for us? What does this mean for my tribe, for my people, for the grander scheme of things? This is the new contract we have. So we are no longer bound to be the holders of information and complexity and patterns and probabilities. We now are the owners of values, context and consequences, meaning that we can create meaning. So this leads us into a position where our stability is redefined. This also means that we are no longer thinking about things staying the same, and that's good. We're coming to peace with that. Certainly the only thing that's permanent is impermanence. The era of complete stability has passed us by. It now comes from having a clear identity, a set of shared principles that are well communicated, and values that travel throughout change. People don't need leaders to stop the ground moving. They need leaders to help them stand on something solid while it does. Okay. So I think the most important leadership question of our time is what can we automate? But this must remain human, so people can remain whole. So what can we automate, but what must remain human so people can remain whole? Because the future will not belong to the leaders who move fastest. It will belong to those who create meaning, coherence and steadiness in a world that never stops changing. Thank you for listening to my podcast today on how we can redefine AI in an era where everything is changing so fast, but humans still have some certain things that need to remain predictable, promote our identity, and of course provide meaning. You've been listening to the Long Run Podcast. On my next episode I'll have Ellie Bliss, and I look forward to talking to her. Thank you very much. Goodbye.